Before Martyrs ever screams, it breathes. It exhales a tension so quiet, so deliberate, that the audience feels it in the bones long before the chaos begins. The opening doesn't rush to shock. It doesn't immediately terrify or repulse. Instead, it lures you into an atmosphere of unease, a world where nothing is as safe as it seems. The camera doesn't just observe, it insinuates itself into the spaces between moments, lingering on corners, shadows, and fleeting gestures that carry the weight of something terrible just beneath the surface. Every frame whispers that what you're about to witness is not conventional horror, it is a confrontation. Released in 2008, Martyrs arrived at a moment when audiences had grown accustomed to genre expectations, jump scares, predictable gore, and cathartic revenge narratives. This film refuses all of that. It does not comfort, it does not console, and it does not provide easy answers. Instead, it challenges viewers to lean into discomfort, to sit with the weight of human suffering and the terrifying depths of obsession. From the first moments, the story places you in the orbit of Lucy and Anna, two women whose lives have been scarred by trauma, yet whose determination to confront the unknown is relentless. Their journey is not just physical, it is psychological, moral, and profoundly existential. The opening scenes are deceptively mundane. A young girl appears lost, a shadow falls where it shouldn't, a conversation carries hidden meaning, and then, without warning, the veneer of normalcy fractures. Violence is not simply presented as spectacle, it is intimate, abrupt, and deeply affecting. Director Pascal Laugier doesn't allow the audience to detach. There is no comfort in distance, no reassurance in knowing it's just a movie. Every cut, every sound cue, every lingering shot feels purposeful, designed to unsettle not because it is shocking, but because it is real within the world of the film. What makes Martyrs immediately gripping is its insistence on consequences. Nothing in this world is arbitrary. Every character choice, every whisper of past trauma, every shadowed hallway matters. You are not simply watching victims or villains, you are watching human beings navigating extremes that defy comprehension. And yet the film balances this darkness with a strange, hypnotic beauty. The cinematography, the framing, the composition of each scene draws your eye even as your stomach tightens. Pain and art collide, producing a tension that is impossible to ignore. From the first frame, Martyrs establishes a promise. This is not a film for the faint of heart. It is a meditation on suffering, endurance, and the extremities of human experience. And it is a promise it keeps. As the narrative begins to unfold, the audience is drawn deeper into a world where morality is complex, fear is constant, and resolution is never guaranteed. In those opening moments, the stage is set not for horror alone, but for reflection, for confrontation, and for an experience that will linger long after the credits roll. The silence between screams becomes as significant as the violence itself, and the film's grip tightens with every passing second. Martyrs relies not on star power, but on performances that feel raw, immediate, and uncomfortably human. Morjana Alaoui embodies Anna, a woman hardened by trauma, yet driven by an almost obsessive pursuit of truth. She is both guide and observer, her presence commanding attention without ever feeling performative. Her eyes, expressions, and small gestures convey history, pain, and an intensity that grounds the film in psychological realism. Lucy, played by Mylène Jumpanoy, is equally compelling, a character whose innocence has been violently stripped away, leaving behind both fragility and unexpected ferocity. The audience is drawn to her not simply as a victim, but as someone whose experiences catalyze the film's exploration of suffering, morality, and the human spirit. Their chemistry, tense, urgent, and often unsettling, forms the emotional core of the story, carrying the weight of both narrative and thematic resonance. Supporting characters, from the secretive figures orchestrating horrific rituals to the secondary victims and witnesses, are handled with precision. They are not caricatures, they are functional, terrifying, and human, emphasizing that monstrosity often wears a familiar face. Even peripheral roles carry significance, reinforcing the sense that every interaction, glance, and decision matters in this tightly controlled, morally complex universe. The casting choice to focus on relatively unknown actors elevates the realism. Viewers are never distracted by fame or expectation. They are immersed fully in the narrative, identifying with the humanity of the characters while being confronted by the extremity of their circumstances. This ensemble-driven approach is central to the film's tension, making each interaction, betrayal, and revelation feel immediate and unavoidable. From the very first scenes, Martyrs immerses the audience in a world where pain is both literal and psychological, where every action carries weight and every shadow hints at past horrors. The story opens with Lucy, a young woman escaping from a horrific childhood ordeal that left her deeply scarred. Her trauma isn't sugar-coated. The film doesn't linger on the event as spectacle. Instead, it shows its reverberations, the way past abuse shapes perception, trust, and instinct. Lucy carries both fear and determination, a volatile mix that will define her choices and drive the story forward. Years later, we meet her as an adult, and she is consumed by the memory of her childhood torment. Lucy's path crosses with Anna, another woman shaped by different horrors, whose presence introduces both guidance and tension. Anna is methodical, intellectual, and precise, a stark contrast to Lucy's emotional volatility. Together, they form an uneasy alliance, one driven by curiosity, anger, and a desire to uncover truth that lies at the intersection of trauma and obsession. Their investigation leads them to the family responsible for Lucy's abuse. The confrontation is immediate, brutal, and psychologically tense. Lagier doesn't shy away from discomfort. The scene is intimate, shocking, and morally complex. Lucy seeks vengeance, but the film reminds us that revenge is never simple, and the consequences of violence are immediate and far-reaching. The narrative never allows the audience to feel safe, forcing them to confront the brutal reality of both human cruelty and the emotional fallout it creates. But Martyrs doesn't stop at personal trauma. Anna's curiosity drives the story into deeper, more horrifying territory. As the film progresses, it becomes clear that there is an organized group orchestrating systematic torture and observation, seeking to create martyrs as part of a disturbing philosophical and religious ideology. The organization's members are methodical, cold, and terrifyingly human, emphasizing that evil is not always monstrous in appearance, but calculated, deliberate, and institutional. The narrative shifts seamlessly between Lucy's personal vendetta and Anna's exploration of this secret society. The audience is pulled into moral dilemmas, the line between victim and instrument becomes blurred, and the ethical weight of survival versus revelation looms large. Each new discovery forces both the characters and viewers to confront questions that have no easy answers. What is the purpose of suffering? Can understanding justify participation? And at what point does curiosity become complicity? As Anna delves deeper, the film escalates to an almost unbearable intensity. The discovery of the organization's full scope transforms the story from a personal revenge tale into a meditation on human endurance, belief, and cruelty. Lagier stages these sequences with chilling precision. Long takes, tight framing, and minimalistic soundscapes amplify tension, making every moment feel immediate and unavoidable. The audience is not just watching Anna and Lucy, they are inhabiting their world, feeling their fear, determination, and shock as if it were their own. Lucy's arc culminates in a confrontation that is both cathartic and horrifying. She confronts her abuser, and the resolution is brutal yet consequential. The film's insistence on realism means that the audience experiences every psychological beat, every moral tremor, without the relief of cinematic distance. Violence is not glamorized, it is lived, felt, and internalized. Anna's journey, however, reaches even further. She survives long enough to witness the philosophical underpinnings of the group, exposing a system that studies human suffering in the most clinical and dehumanized way. The revelation is devastating. The pursuit of martyrdom is mechanized, detached, and relentless. Anna becomes both a participant and an observer, a duality that underscores the film's exploration of morality and the human response to suffering. The ending is unforgettable, haunting, and morally ambiguous. Lagier denies the audience a comforting resolution. Pain, survival, and understanding converge in ways that challenge conventional narrative expectations. Viewers are left not with triumph or catharsis, but with reflection, unease, and lingering questions about humanity, cruelty, and the extremes to which people are willing or forced to go. Martyrs concludes not with answers, but with resonance, demanding that the audience sit with the ethical, emotional, and psychological weight of the events they have witnessed. The brilliance of Martyrs lies in this combination. It tells a story that is deeply personal and yet disturbingly universal, intimate yet expansive. Lucy and Anna are not just characters, they are conduits for the audience to explore fear, endurance, and the limits of human experience. The narrative is relentless, immersive, and unforgiving, ensuring that the impact of the story lingers long after the credits roll. Martyrs entered the world not just as a film, but as a provocation. From the moment it premiered, audiences and critics were split, and its reception quickly became a lightning rod for debate about the boundaries of cinema, morality, and human tolerance for on-screen suffering. The controversy was immediate and intense. Unlike mainstream horror, which often disguises brutality and fantasy, Martyrs confronts the audience with visceral, unrelenting depictions of pain, psychological torment, and existential horror. This was not a casual fright, it was a cinematic experience that demanded reflection, discomfort, and confrontation. Several countries reacted strongly. France, the home of its creators, allowed screenings, but accompanied them with warnings. In other regions, the film faced outright bans or severe age restrictions, primarily due to the extreme depiction of torture and the philosophical framing that suggested suffering as a tool rather than just narrative shock. Some critics labeled it sadistic or unwatchable, and parental groups and censorship boards questioned whether it had any place in cinemas at all. For many, it crossed a line they felt should never be challenged on screen. The uproar was fueled not only by the physical content, but by the film's psychological audacity. Martyrs asked the audience to think about why we watch, why we endure, and what it means to witness suffering without immediate catharsis. Unlike conventional horror, where the monster is external and the audience can distance themselves, Locquier's work places the terror inside human institutions, inside human decisions, and most unsettlingly, inside our own reactions. This introspective horror made some viewers uncomfortable in ways that transcended mere shock or gore, raising questions about morality, empathy, and human curiosity. Film festivals were divided. Some praised it as a masterpiece of modern horror, applauding its audacity, meticulous craft, and philosophical depth. Others refused to show it entirely, citing its potential to traumatize audiences or provoke public outrage. Debates raged in reviews, online forums, and academic circles about whether the film was a work of art, a cruel experiment, or both. The conversations surrounding its release cemented its reputation as one of the most controversial horror films of the 21st century. Ultimately, the controversy elevated Martyrs into cultural infamy. It became more than a film. It became a challenge to comfort, to desensitization, and to the way we consume stories about suffering. Whether banned, restricted, or lauded, it left an indelible mark on the cinematic landscape, proving that horror could be more than entertainment. It could be a mirror reflecting our deepest fears, ethical dilemmas, and moral curiosity. Over time, Martyrs stopped being discussed as just another extreme horror film and began to be treated as something far more complicated and unsettling. Its initial shock slowly gave way to deeper analysis, and what once caused walkouts and outrage became the subject of academic essays, film theory debates, and long-form criticism. The film didn't fade after controversy. It hardened into a reference point. Within the horror genre, Martyrs reshaped expectations. It arrived during the height of so-called torture horror, yet refused to fit neatly into that label. Where many films of the era used violence as spectacle or adrenaline, Martyrs stripped pleasure out of the experience entirely. The suffering served a purpose inside the story, not to entertain, but to interrogate belief, endurance, and the cost of obsession. This distinction forced critics and audiences alike to reconsider what horror could do beyond fear. The film also helped define the international movement later labeled the New French Extremity. Alongside films like Irreversible and Inside, Martyrs demonstrated that genre cinema could confront philosophical and existential ideas without softening its edges. It proved that horror could function as a form of moral inquiry, even when the questions it raised were deeply uncomfortable and unresolved. For filmmakers, Martyrs became a cautionary benchmark. Many cited it as a film that could not and should not be replicated. Its impact wasn't about influence through imitation, but through warning. Directors learned that pushing boundaries came with responsibility, and that intensity without intention quickly collapses into exploitation. Martyrs survived because it never flinched from its own meaning. Audience perception evolved as well.
Viewers who initially dismissed the film as excessive returned to it years later with different eyes. Age, experience, and distance softened the shock and sharpened the themes. Discussion shifted from how far is too far to why does this affect us so deeply. The film's refusal to offer comfort became its defining strength. Its ending, in particular, continues to provoke debate. The lack of closure forces viewers to sit with uncertainty, turning interpretation into a personal experience. There is no universal takeaway, only reflection. That ambiguity ensured the film's longevity, keeping it alive in conversation long after trends moved on. Today, Martyrs occupies a rare space in cinema history. It is respected, feared, and debated in equal measure. It is screened with warnings, discussed with caution, and remembered with unease, not because it was shocking, but because it was sincere. Its legacy is not built on gore, but on endurance. Not just the endurance of its characters, but of its ideas. Martyrs endures because it dared to ask a question that horror films rarely ask honestly. Not what scares us, but why we're willing to watch suffering at all. By the time Martyrs reaches its final moments, it has stripped away every familiar safety net. There is no heroic victory, no moral balance restored, no reassurance that suffering leads neatly to meaning. Instead, the film leaves you alone with your thoughts, asking you to confront not what you saw, but how you reacted to seeing it. This is where Martyrs quietly becomes its most unsettling. It doesn't lecture. It doesn't explain itself. It simply steps back and lets the weight of its choices settle in the room. The silence at the end isn't empty. It's heavy. It's the kind of silence that follows difficult truths, the kind that lingers long after the screen fades to black. What the film ultimately confronts is belief. Not religious belief alone, but belief in systems, in authority, in the idea that suffering can be justified if it serves a greater purpose. The people behind the cruelty in Martyrs are not monsters hiding in shadows. They are organized, articulate, convinced they are right. That may be the most disturbing idea of all, that horror doesn't always come from chaos, but from structure. For the viewer, the experience becomes deeply personal. Some will reject the film outright, unwilling to engage with its intensity. Others will find themselves revisiting it, not because it was enjoyable, but because it refused to let them remain passive. Martyrs doesn't ask to be liked, it asks to be endured. And in that endurance, it reveals something uncomfortable about curiosity, empathy, and limits. There is no single lesson waiting at the end. That's intentional. The film respects the audience enough to let interpretation remain fractured and unresolved. One person may see a condemnation of fanaticism. Another may see a warning about intellectual obsession. Someone else may see a meditation on trauma and survival. None of these readings cancel each other out, and that is why Martyrs still matters.
Years later, it remains difficult to recommend casually, not because it is forbidden, but because it demands responsibility from its audience. It challenges the idea that cinema exists only to comfort or distract. It reminds us that some stories are meant to disturb, not for shock, but for honesty. Martyrs ends where many films refuse to go, without answers, without relief, without permission to look away. It trusts the viewer to sit with uncertainty, to wrestle with meaning, and to decide what, if anything, was learned. And perhaps that's the final truth the film leaves behind. Not that suffering has meaning, but that our need to assign meaning to suffering says more about us than we are comfortable admitting. The screen goes dark, but the questions remain, and that is where Martyrs truly ends.